Ow. Hey everybody, welcome to Professor Long's Lectures in Anatomy and Physiology. I'm Professor Bob Long. We've been going over the anatomy of the heart. I'm going to wrap up the anatomy of the heart in this video. If you're in my class, this is what I want you to know. If you're in someone else's class, there may be additional structures and things you need to know. But please hit like and subscribe. If you need help, you can email me at blong@delmar.edu, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. You don't even have to be in my class, okay? Now, we have some stuff left to do on the heart. If you're following on the list of things to know, we've been working on page 14 and 15. We're talking about, or 13 and 14, I should say, and we've been talking about the structures of the heart. We have two things left to do on the heart. We have to do what's called the cardiovascular or the coronary circulation system. Our heart has its own circulation, and so the vessels that feed the heart are called the coronary arteries and coronary veins. Corazón, if you speak Spanish or Latin, means heart. So we're going to go over coronary circulation or the cardiac circulation, the heart's own circulatory system. And we're going to go over the conducting system of the heart, and I'll talk about that. The heart has its own action potentials that it can generate. So listen, one of the primary things that we talk about in A&P, and if you've been in my class, you've probably seen me or heard me talk about this multiple times, okay? But our cells need oxygen and glucose. We run them through mitochondria to pump out 36 molecules of ATP. A lot of energy for one molecule of glucose. And we get some carbon dioxide out of that. So without oxygen, our cells can convert glucose into ATP, but we only get 2 ATP. So imagine if you got, say, 36 miles to gallon in your car, or you only got 2 miles per gallon. If you were driving on a long stretch of road that didn't have gas stations, like if you're in Texas and you pass Junction heading out towards El Paso, you can drive for 4 hours and not see anything. So you would run out of gas before you can refuel. For us, refueling is eating. So our cells are converting oxygen and glucose into energy, and they pump out carbon dioxide. That's the whole reason for the circulatory system, is to deliver that oxygen, the glucose and the other nutrients and ions to our cells. They dump their waste into that fluid. We return that waste, and as we're returning it, we filter it through the livers and kidneys, and then we have to reoxygenate it at the lungs. Now, our muscles, if you remember from part 1 A&P, all the actin and myosin contractions burn tremendous amount of ATP in one muscle contraction. Well, the heart is a muscle. It's cardiac muscle, but it still has all the actin and myosin and all those little sarcomeres and contracts. And every time your heart beats, it burns billions and trillions of molecules of ATP in one cell, let alone the millions of cells that make up the heart. So every heart contraction is burning energy. And the heart beats an average of 75 beats per minute, somewhere between 70 and 80 beats per minute for a normal adult at rest. If you do that times 60 minutes, times 24 hours, in one day, your heart can beat somewhere from 108 to 109,000 heartbeats in one day without stopping. And that's without any stress or exercise. Then when your heart rate goes up, it's even more than that. So imagine all that energy that the heart is consuming, and it's doing that constantly. So before the heart, if we were all stranded on a deserted island, say a whole group of us, a dozen of us, and I found a piece of shrimp or something to eat, guess who I'm going to feed first? Me. I want to try to save everybody. But if I can only save one person, and my wife and children aren't there, that person's going to be me. And I would expect you to do the same. So guess what organ the heart feeds blood to first? The heart. So the heart has its own circulatory system, and before any of this oxygenated blood goes out the aorta and out these vessels to all the other parts of the body, there are some branches at the base of the aorta that feed to the heart itself. And if I look at this model here, I can see that these two little branches are called the coronary arteries. There's a right coronary artery and a left coronary artery. Those arteries are going to penetrate the wall of the heart and run down here. So if I look at this model, I can see over here underneath the right auricle, this red vessel coming down is the right coronary artery. and it has multiple branches, but that's called the right coronary artery. Now, coming out right next to the pulmonary trunk and between that and the auricle, there's a branch here called the left coronary artery. And the left coronary artery splits immediately, and one branch goes underneath the auricle and wraps around. To bend around is circumflex. So this red vessel right here, not the blue one, but the red one, is called the circumflex artery or the circumflex branch. And the second branch runs straight down right in between the two ventricles. And since it's on the front of the heart between the two ventricles, it's called the anterior interventricular artery or the anterior interventricular branch. For people who do, excuse me, I have roughed up vocal cords. For people who do emergency medicine, this is sometimes called the descending artery of the heart because it goes straight down the heart. And some people also call it the widowmaker because if it gets clogged off and you can't get any blood flow to the left ventricle will stop beating and you have a heart attack, and we stop flowing blood everywhere else and you could die. So anyway, that's your left coronary artery, the circumflex artery, this red branch right here, and this little red branch is called the anterior interventricular artery. Okay. Now, as the blood flows through the muscle of the heart, it's going to give off all its oxygen and need to go get oxygenated again. So if I look at the back of the heart, actually if I start on the front, right where the circumflex artery is, this large blue vein is called the great cardiac vein. Okay, this is your great cardiac vein. That great cardiac vein is going to wrap around to the back here. And if I lift this off the stand, I can see the great cardiac vein come here. And then all of these other veins will meet up at this large structure here. That's called the coronary sinus. A sinus is a large vein that many other veins empty into. So that's called the coronary sinus. And then this will all drain right back into the right atrium, go out to the lungs through the pulmonary trunk. Okay, so you should know those structures. If I open this up, right coronary artery, left coronary artery. This is also the right coronary artery. If it comes here, it comes out and runs down. The left coronary artery comes out here. It splits into a circumflex artery and an anterior interventricular artery. Remember, arteries are red, veins are blue, except for the pulmonaries. Now, the coronary vein, that's the great cardiac vein right there, and then it leads to the coronary sinus. You should know that blood flow through the heart. Now, one last thing I want to show you, and I'm going to use this model, so let me push that one out of the way. Our heart has its own conducting system. In part 1 A&P, we learned a lot about action potentials. Due to the flow of sodium and potassium and calcium, these ions bring voltage with them into cells and alter the voltages. So there's two types of excitable cells, or cells that can conduct action potentials: muscle cells and neurons. Skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle cells conduct action potential. And if you remember in part 1, sodium flows into the cell, shocks, causes a action potential to spread down the T-tubules, shocks the sarcoplasmic reticulum into releasing calcium, blah, blah, blah. Well, the same thing is going to happen in heart muscle. The only difference is this. When I cut the nerve going to the muscles of my arm, if I cut the nerve, then no neurotransmitter gets released at the neuromuscular junction, and I would be paralyzed. I couldn't move them. I would send the signal from my brain, but the wire is cut and there's no release of neurotransmitter. So the muscles are flaccid and I have flaccid paralysis. For the heart, we don't have that. The heart has some specialized cells that have too many leaky sodium channels. And as the sodium ions leak in, they raise the threshold and raise the voltage until we hit threshold, and then it fires an action potential. It's only a small group of cells that do this in two locations, and they're called the nodal cells. If I look here on the model here, this little green spot, and if you're following along, we're still on page 14 on the list of things to know. This little green spot right here is called the sinoatrial node. You'll hear me say SA node a lot, but you cannot abbreviate on the lab test. That's called the sinoatrial node. When those cells hit the threshold and fire their action potential, it's going to spread all through the atria, and the atria will contract. While it's spreading through the atria, we cannot see it on our models, but there's a series of fibers that run that action potential through the wall here and hit this green spot. And that green spot is called the atrioventricular node, or AV node. Again, on the test, you have to spell it out. And by the time the muscle tissue has contracted here, the AV node depolarizes. Now, you'll hear me talk about the fibrous skeleton of the heart in lecture, and that runs straight across here. So the action potential starts in the sinoatrial node, spreads through the muscle of the atria, and they contract, but it hits the connective tissue, and connective tissue cannot conduct action potentials. So it stops. And I don't want the action potential to go from here down, because then the ventricles would contract from the from the top down, or from the base towards the apex. But the openings are up here. I want the ventricles to force the blood up. So the action potential stops here, and as it runs through what's called the internodal pathway, which is not on our list, you cannot see it, it will hit the atrioventricular node and depolarize that. And then right inside here, there's some little lines that are called the atrioventricular bundle, also commonly referred to as the bundle of His, after a Dr. His that first described it. And as the action potential spreads from the AV node through the bundle of His, it will split into these two little white bands here called the bundle branches. There's a white bundle branch and a left bundle branch. And that action potential spreads all the way down here and then curves back out to these little finger-like or flame-like little structures. And those little finger-like structures or flame-like structures are called Purkinje fibers, after a Dr. Purkinje. And that's where the action potential spreads all the way down and then hits the muscle cells, and they start to contract like this. So the atria contract, there's a delay until everything hits here, and when the atria contract, the ventricles relax. So that's your conducting system of the heart. Quick review: sinoatrial node, atrioventricular node, the green spots, the atrioventricular bundle, this little group of lines here, the two bundle branches, the right bundle branch and the left bundle branch, and then all the Purkinje fibers. Okay? That will conclude all the structures that I want you to know on the heart. Anything else that's covered on the list or anywhere else, you're not responsible for this lab test. Not at this time. So I hope you learned something. I hope that made sense. It might be simpler if you just went over the structures without all that tying it into lecture. If you want just the structures, Dr. Jones, I have her videos on my webpage, on my Canvas page. You can watch her videos, and I think they just run straight through the anatomical structures without all the explanation tying it to lecture. So either way, whichever one you prefer. Thanks for watching. I hope you had as much fun as I did. I always have a blast doing this. Do this till you can't stand it, do it till you understand it, and then do it 5 more times so that you can make your A and move on to the next level of your career and have a fantastic financial future. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.